The Galactic Union prided itself on being civilized. After 17 interstellar wars, 3 near-extinction events, and one particularly embarrassing incident involving a sentient gas cloud and a birthday candle, they'd finally gotten their act together. The Galactic Accords on Warfare and Conflict Resolution (GWCR) ran to exactly 17,346 pages, with an additional 8,952 pages of footnotes, and was considered the pinnacle of evolved thinking. It covered everything from the proper etiquette for declaring war forms submitted in triplicate, at least 3 standard cycles before hostilities to acceptable battlefield refreshments, no stimulant stronger than type 3 caffeine equivalents. Most importantly, it explicitly prohibited anyone from doing anything that might be considered excessively unpleasant, a phrase that took up a mere 433 pages to properly define. Into this delicate balance of power and paperwork, humanity arrived like a toddler at a crystal exhibition, curious, unpredictable, and with absolutely no concept of the value of what they might break. Earth had been discovered quite by accident when a Vraxian survey ship picked up reruns of I Love Lucy and mistook it for distress signals from an advanced civilization. By the time they realized their error, first contact had already been initiated, and the Galactic Union was stuck with its newest, most problematic member species. Humans, the Union's High Counselor Zeb Trox had declared, are simultaneously the most endearing and terrifying species we have ever encountered. They have no natural defenses, yet show no fear. They have no claws, yet build weapons of astonishing destructiveness. They have no telepathic abilities, yet somehow always know when you're lying about having eaten the last quantum cupcake. Humanity's admission to the Galactic Union had been contentious, with the final vote passing by the narrowest of margins, 1,247 for, 1,246 against, with 3 abstentions and 1 delegate who got lost in the bathroom. As part of the admission agreement, Earth was required to send an ambassador, someone who exemplified human values, human ingenuity, and human restraint. They sent Debbie Rawlins. Debbie was a 42-year-old suburban mother of 2 from Duluth, Minnesota. She had not been Earth's first choice. She hadn't been the second, third, or even the 100th choice. In fact, she hadn't been a choice at all. What happened was this: the actual ambassador had come down with a severe case of diplomatic flu the day before departure. His backup had been in a minor hovercart accident. The third choice had suddenly developed an allergy to space travel. And somehow, through a series of increasingly unlikely events, Debbie Rawlins, who had only come to the spaceport to drop off her neighbor's cat, found herself on the shuttle to Galactic Union headquarters. Well, she had said, straightening her target cardigan as she took her seat in the Grand Council chamber, "This is certainly different from the PTA meetings I'm used to." Debbie had adapted to her role with surprising ease. Her experience mediating between warring soccer moms proved invaluable in interstellar diplomacy. Her ability to stretch a lasagna to feed unexpected guests impressed the Resource Management Committee. And her no-nonsense approach to conflict resolution, "I don't care who started it, I'm ending it," had actually prevented a minor war in the Andromedan sector. Everything was going surprisingly well until the day her 17-year-old son, Trevor, went missing during a school field trip to the Galactic Cultural Exchange. One minute he was taking selfies with a 4-armed Xerxian poem weaver. The next he had vanished completely, along with 3 other students and a very confused teacher's aide. The official response was a 17-page form that needed to be submitted in sextuplicate to 6 different departments. The unofficial response, delivered by a sympathetic clerk with 7 eyes and a nervous twitch, was the Vraxians probably took them for their collection. They do that sometimes. Nothing to be done, really. That clerk clearly didn't know whom he was dealing with. Because while the universe had laws against war crimes, it had absolutely no provisions for dealing with Debbie Rawlins, an angry human mother whose son had just been collected. And that was about to become everyone's problem. Debbie Rawlins marched into the Department of Interspecies Disappearances and Temporal Misplacements with the same energy she brought to confronting store managers about expired coupons. The waiting room was filled with beings of all descriptions, some with too many limbs, some with too few, all clutching their own multicolored forms and looking miserable. "Excuse me," she said to the receptionist, a gelatinous cube with 3 eye stalks who was somehow wearing a necktie. "My son is missing and I need to speak to whoever's in charge." The cube gurgled apologetically. "You'll need to take a number, fill out forms K27, L14, and the blue one, no, not that blue, the cerulean blue, and then wait to be called. Current waiting time is approximately 7 galactic standard cycles. That's about 9 Earth weeks, helpfully translated a nearby being that looked like a cross between a praying mantis and a desk lamp. Debbie's smile didn't waver, but it did take on a dangerous edge. I don't think you understand. My son, a minor human child under my protection, has been taken by these Vraxians for their collection. This isn't a lost luggage claim. This is a kidnapping. The receptionist's eye stalks drooped with genuine sympathy. I understand your distress, Ambassador Rawlins, but the Vraxian Empire has certain cultural exemptions. Their royal collection is protected under the Galactic Heritage Preservation Act of Stardate 2387.4. They collect people, and you all just let them. Not people, precisely. Specimens. For cultural and scientific study. It's all very humane. They're given adequate nutrition and regular exercise periods. Debbie's eye twitched. My son is not a specimen. It was at this moment that Officer Clicks entered the room. Standing precisely 1.4 meters tall, with blue-gray skin and a uniform so crisp it could cut butter, Clicks was the perfect example of a by-the-book bureaucrat. As the junior officer in the Interspecies Relations and Compliance Division, it was his misfortune to be on specimen retrieval complaint duty that day. Ambassador Rawlins, Clicks said in the carefully neutral tone of someone who has attended multiple sensitivity trainings, I've been assigned to assist with your concerns. I should inform you that the Vraxian collection is fully sanctioned by my son, Trevor, 17 Earth years old, blue braces on his teeth, terrible taste in music, loves those disgusting energy drinks that smell like battery acid. That's who they took, Officer Clicks, not a specimen, my child. Clicks's four-fingered hand nervously adjusted his regulation cap. Yes, well, perhaps we could discuss this in my office? With fewer, he gestured vaguely at the room full of beings who were now watching with undisguised interest. In Clicks's meticulously organized office, Debbie sat on a chair designed for someone with a very different anatomy and tried not to think about how much it felt like sitting on a bicycle seat mounted on a basketball. Now then, Clicks began, pulling up a holographic display. There are proper channels for this sort of thing. First, we'll need to submit a request for information under the Cultural Exchange Transparency Protocol, which should be processed within 3 to 5. Where is the Vraxian embassy? Debbie interrupted. Clicks blinked all three of his eyes in sequence. I'm not sure that's the appropriate. Where is it? Level 342, Sector 7G, but Ambassador Rawlins, I really must advise against any direct. Debbie was already standing. You have two choices, Officer Clicks. You can take me there, or I can find it myself and tell everyone I meet along the way exactly what I think about a civilization that allows children to be collected. What followed was a silent calculation on Clicks's part, weighing the potential diplomatic incident of Debbie storming the Vraxian embassy versus the guaranteed diplomatic incident of Debbie telling the truth to anyone who would listen. His shoulders slumped. I'll escort you, but only to prevent an interstellar incident. The journey to the Vraxian embassy involved 3 gravity lifts, a molecular transporter, and a particularly unpleasant moving walkway that seemed designed specifically to hit the human funny bone with rhythmic precision. Throughout it all, Debbie peppered Clicks with questions. How long have these Vraxians been collecting specimens? Approximately 7,000 years, and no one stopped them. They're founding members of the Union. Their scientific contributions are significant, more significant than people's children. To that, Clicks had no answer. The Vraxian embassy resembled nothing so much as an enormous terrarium, its transparent walls revealing a jungle-like interior filled with strange plants and pools of iridescent liquid. The Vraxians themselves looked like elegant, upright lizards, their scales shimmering with patterns that seemed to shift and change like mood rings. At the reception desk, a young Vraxian was clearly at the end of a very long shift. His name tag read Glorp in 15 different languages, and he had the universal look of an intern who was reconsidering their career choices. Welcome to the Vraxian embassy, Glorp recited with the enthusiasm of a funeral director on their 3rd funeral of the day. How may I direct your inquiry? You can direct me to my son, Debbie said, slapping a photo of Trevor on the desk, taken yesterday from the Cultural Exchange Center. Glorp glanced at the photo, then at Clicks, then back at Debbie. Something in her expression made him sit up straighter. I'm not authorized to discuss collection acquisitions. You'll need to speak with a curatorial representative, and they're all in a collection strategy meeting until next week. Next week, Debbie's voice could have flashed frozen nitrogen. Glorp's scales shifted to a nervous yellow-green. Protocol requires. Let me tell you what this mother requires, Debbie said, leaning over the desk. I need to know where my son is, that he's safe, and how I'm getting him back. And I need to know now. I could lose my internship. I could lose my scholarship. I could. I once organized a bake sale that raised enough money to rebuild our entire school gymnasium after a freak dodgeball incident, Debbie said. I have planned birthday parties for 26-year-olds with conflicting food allergies. I have mediated disputes between the chess club and the drama club over auditorium use. Do you really think you're going to be the obstacle that stops me? Behind them, clicks made a small, distressed sound. Ambassador Rawlins, threatening a diplomatic staff member is a violation of. Who's threatening? I'm just explaining my qualifications. Glorp's scales had now shifted to a thoughtful blue. He looked left, then right, then leaned forward. Look, I can't tell you anything officially. But hypothetically, if someone wanted to find out about new acquisitions, they might want to check the preliminary processing center on level 7 of the collection repository. Hypothetically speaking. And where would this hypothetical repository be located? Off station. Secure facility. Very restricted access. And how would someone hypothetically get there? Glorp's voice dropped to a whisper. There's a transport leaving in 20 minutes. Service entrance Bay 12C. For, nutrition delivery. Debbie reached into her purse and pulled out a package of double-stuff Oreos, a rare commodity in this sector of space. She slid them across the desk. Hypothetically, these cookies are delicious. Especially the cream filling. Glorp's eyes widened as his scales flushed a delighted pink. He quickly tucked the cookies into his desk drawer. I never saw you. You never saw me. And if anyone asks, I definitely didn't tell you about the service coordinator's passcode BX7779UQZM30. As they left the embassy, Clicks was practically vibrating with anxiety. This is highly irregular. Unauthorized access to a Vraxian facility is a Class 3 diplomatic offense. As an officer of the law, I cannot condone. Then don't condone it, Debbie said, checking her watch, a device that was hilariously primitive by galactic standards but still told accurate time. Just help me get my son back. After that, you can fill out all the forms you want. You can write me up for every rule I've broken. But right now, there's a scared teenager who needs his mom. Clicks opened his mouth, closed it, then sighed, a sound like air escaping from a very stressed balloon. Bay 12C is this way, and hypothetically speaking, I might be able to authorize your presence as a cultural observer under Section 47B of the Interspecies Exchange Protocol. Hypothetically, that sounds perfect, Debbie said, giving Clicks a pat on his thin shoulder that nearly knocked him over. Now let's go get my son before I have to get really creative. As they hurried toward Bay 12C, neither of them noticed the security camera swiveling to follow their progress, nor the alert that was already being transmitted to the Vraxian High Curator. Attention, human specimen, progenitor en route. Classification unusually determined. Threat level. They underestimated. Aussie. Bay 12C smelled like overripe fruit and industrial cleaner. Debbie, Clicks, and their new accomplice Glorp, who had decided that this adventure beat filing reports, huddled behind a stack of crates marked nutritional substrate perishable. I still don't understand why you followed us, Clicks whispered to Glorp, his antennae twitching with anxiety. Glorp's scales rippled with a pattern that translated roughly to youthful rebellion. Do you have any idea how boring it is to work at that desk? The highlight of my day is watching the ambassador from Rigel 7 try to use the water fountain with his snout. Less complaining, more helping, Debbie said, peering around the crates at the loading dock. 3 Vraxian workers were loading containers onto a sleek transport ship. How do we get on board without being seen? Glorp pointed to a large container nearby. Those are automated food delivery units. They're programmed to go straight to the kitchen facilities. Perfect, Debbie said. We hide in there. Clicks made a sound like a deflating balloon. That would be at least 7 different violations of. Save it for your report, Debbie said. already moving toward the container. You can call it How I Saved Human Children while following proper procedures mostly. The container was spacious enough for the three of them, though it smelled strongly of something like rancid licorice. As they settled in among packages of what appeared to be dehydrated protein, Glorp spoke up. "Just so you know, this is going to take us to the main collection facility, not the processing center I mentioned. They've probably already moved your son." "That's actually better," Debbie said. "Now we can get all the kids, not just Trevor." Clix's eyes bulged. "All? Ambassador Rawlins, our objective is to retrieve your son, not to..." "Not to what? Not to free a bunch of kidnapped children? Is that really the sentence you want to finish, officer?" The container lurched as it was loaded onto the transport. Through a small air vent, they could see the loading bay fall away as they were carried aboard. "I've never broken a rule in my life," Clix moaned. "Not one. Not even the optional ones that everyone ignores." "First time for everything," Debbie said, patting his shoulder. "Besides, isn't there some kind of universal law about protecting children?" "Well, yes, Section 129 of the Sentient Rights Accord does specify that juvenile specimens of any species are entitled to." Wait, Clix's eyes narrowed. "How did you know that?" Debbie smiled. "I've been reading. Did you think I spent the last 6 months just organizing potlucks? I've gone through every regulation accord and treaty in the database. The Vraxians may have found loopholes for their collection, but two can play at that game." The journey took approximately 40 minutes, during which Debbie outlined her plan, such as it was. Clix pointed out 17 flaws, 2 potential diplomatic incidents, and 1 possible interstellar war. Glorp suggested they could just set something on fire as a distraction, an idea that was firmly rejected. When the container finally stopped moving, they carefully peeked out. They were in a massive kitchen facility, with various beings in food service uniforms moving about. None of them paid any attention to the newly arrived container, apparently. They were used to automated deliveries. "Phase 1 complete," Debbie whispered. "Now we need to find the main collection hall." Glorp's scales shifted to a helpful blue pattern. "I can access a terminal and pull up the facility map." "Great. Clix, you're on lookout duty. I'm going to find us some disguises." While Glorp slithered over to a computer terminal and Clix stood nervously by the door, Debbie rummaged through the kitchen until she found 3 food service uniforms of varying sizes and shapes. "Put these on," she said, returning with her bounty, "and try to look like you belong." Clix reluctantly donned a uniform clearly designed for a being with more limbs than he possessed. "This is horrible. I look like I'm wearing a tent." "At least yours fits over your head," Glorp complained, his uniform bunched awkwardly around his tail. Debbie, whose uniform was designed for something with a much longer torso, had simply tied the excess material around her waist like a sash. "Stop complaining. We look fine." "We look like we escaped from a laundry accident," Clix muttered. With their dubious disguises in place, they followed Glorp's directions through the massive facility. They passed numerous staff members, most of whom gave them odd looks but said nothing. Apparently, ill-fitting uniforms weren't unusual enough to question. They had almost reached the main collection hall when they rounded a corner and came face to face with a Vraxian security officer. "You 3. Identify yourselves," the officer demanded, hand moving to what was presumably a weapon. Without missing a beat, Debbie stepped forward. "Thank goodness you're here. There's been a terrible mix-up in the protein storage unit. Something is growing in there, something with tentacles and an attitude. The head chef sent us to find security before it gets into the ventilation system." The officer blinked. "Growing? In the protein storage?" "It ate 3 spoons and a ladle right in front of us," Debbie said, eyes wide with manufactured concern. "We tried to reason with it, but it just made these horrible gurgling noises and reached for the cutlery drawer." The security officer hesitated, clearly trying to decide if this was a genuine emergency or if they were being pranked. "I should call this in." Of course, Debbie nodded vigorously. "But maybe check it out first. The chef said something about not wanting to cause a panic above his pay grade if it turns out to be a false alarm. Something about the High Curator having important guests today. That did it." The officer nodded briskly. "Right. I'll investigate. Which way to the protein storage? As soon as the officer was out of sight, they continued their journey, finally reaching the massive doors of the main collection hall. We need an access code, Glorp said, examining the security panel. This is going to be a problem. At that moment, Debbie reached into her purse and pulled out her smartphone, a device that was hilariously outdated by galactic standards. What are you going to do with that primitive communication device? Clix asked. It can't possibly interface with Vraxian technology. No, Debbie said. But it has something better. She pulled up a video of Trevor's high school band concert, cranked the volume to maximum, and held it against the door. The cacophony of 100 teenagers playing Stairway to Heaven with more enthusiasm than skill blasted through the speakers. Inside the collection hall, alarms immediately began to wail. Error: unclassified audio contaminant detected. Initiating clean room protocols. The massive doors slid open as internal systems activated to locate and eliminate the acoustic intrusion. Debbie switched off the video and smiled. Never underestimate the power of bad music. They slipped inside just before the doors closed again. What they saw left them speechless. The collection hall was enormous, stretching at least a kilometer in all directions, and everywhere, in carefully controlled environments, were children. Children of every species imaginable, going about their daily routines in what amounted to elaborate zoos. This is Clix couldn't even finish his sentence. Wrong, Debbie supplied, her voice hard. This is wrong. Glorp's scales had turned a sickly grey. I knew about the collection, but I didn't know it was like this. Debbie was already scanning the habitats, looking for humans. We need to find Trevor and the others, and then we need to shut this place down. Shut it down, Clix squeaked. Ambassador Rawlins, that's not what we... But Debbie was already marching toward a habitat containing what appeared to be human teenagers. As she approached, she could see Trevor among them, looking bored and irritated but unharmed. Trevor's eyes widened in disbelief as he spotted her. Mom. Over here. Trevor. Stand back from the barrier, honey. We're getting you out of there. As she examined the habitat's control panel, an elegant Vraxian in elaborate robes approached, flanked by security officers. Ambassador Rawlins, the Vraxian said smoothly. What an unexpected pleasure. I am Curator Zex Talik. I understand you have concerns about our newest acquisitions, but I assure you, they are being treated with the utmost care. Debbie turned slowly, and the look on her face made even the security officers take a step back. Care? You kidnapped my son. You kidnapped children. This isn't a collection, it's a prison. Zex Talik's scales rippled with what might have been amusement. Such dramatic language. This is a cultural preservation project. A living museum. These specimens will help us understand the diversity of sentient development across the galaxy. They're not specimens. They're kids. And they're coming with me. The curator's expression hardened. I'm afraid that won't be possible. The collection is protected by the highest laws of the Galactic Union. Even as Earth's ambassador, you have no authority here. Debbie smiled then, a smile that made Clix take a protective step behind Glorp. You know what? You're right. I don't have authority as an ambassador. She pulled out her smartphone again and held it up. But I do have this. Your primitive device? What could that possibly? It's connected to the Galactic Infinite. Right now I'm streaming everything I see to every member species of the Union. Your collection just went live to about 7 trillion viewers. It was a bluff. Her phone couldn't possibly do that, but the curator didn't know that. His scales flashed a panicked white. You can't. The collection is classified. This is a security breach of the highest. Actually, Clix piped up from behind Glorp. According to Section 47B of the Interspecies Exchange Protocol, cultural observations by accredited ambassadors are permitted for educational purposes. And since Ambassador Rawlins is technically on a cultural observation mission that I authorized, he trailed off with a nervous cough. The curator hissed in fury. Security. Confiscate that device and detain these intruders. What happened next would later be described in at least 17 different incident reports, each more bewildered than the last. Debbie, armed with nothing but a purse and maternal rage, managed to Use a travel-sized can of hairspray as an improvised propellant. Convert her minivan keys into makeshift brass knuckles. Deploy a package of wet wipes with devastating efficiency. Demonstrate why soccer moms should never be underestimated. When it was over, 3 security officers were incapacitated. The curator was trapped in a supply closet, and Clicks was having what appeared to be a nervous breakdown. 17 violations, he was muttering. 17. No, 18 if you count improper use of cleaning supplies in a secure facility. Glorp, meanwhile, had figured out the habitat control systems and was systematically releasing the children. Ambassador, he called out, I've triggered the emergency protocols. All habitats are opening, but we've got about 10 minutes before the facility lockdown activates. Debbie nodded, helping Trevor and the other human teenagers out of their enclosure. Then we'd better move fast. Clicks. Stop counting violations and start helping kids. What followed was perhaps the most chaotic evacuation in the history of the Galactic Union. Hundreds of children from dozens of species all moving through the facility, led by a determined human mom, a rebellious Vraxian intern, and a rule-obsessed officer who was still mumbling about proper procedures, even as he carried 2 small tentacled children in his arms. They had almost reached the transport bay when the facility AI announced full lockdown initiating in 3 minutes. All personnel proceed to emergency stations. We're not going to make it, Glorp said. His scales a worried purple. The transport bay is still 2 levels down. Debbie looked around, spotted a maintenance panel, and made a decision. New plan. Everyone, follow me. What are you doing? Clicks asked, as Debbie pried open the panel. Making a shortcut, she replied, revealing a large waste disposal chute. It's this or getting locked in. A garbage chute. We can't put children in A. It leads straight to the lower levels. Trust me, I read the facility schematics while you were having your breakdown. Trevor, you first. Cool, Trevor said, and without hesitation slid into the chute with a whoop. One by one, the children followed, many of them treating it like an amusement park ride. Clicks looked ready to faint. This violates at least 27 safety regulations. Write me up later, Debbie said, helping a small reptilian child into the chute. Right now we move. With seconds to spare, they all made it down the chute, landing in a fortunately empty waste collection chamber. From there, it was a straight shot to the transport bay, where Glorp managed to override the security on a large personnel carrier. As they lifted off, alarms blaring behind them, Clicks finally stopped counting violations and simply stared at Debbie. You know they're going to come after us. This is going to cause an interstellar incident. Debbie, with Trevor safely by her side and hundreds of rescued children secured in the transport's passenger section, just smiled. Let them come. I think they'll find that messing with other people's kids is the real crime here. She patted her purse, which still contained her smartphone. Besides, I wasn't entirely bluffing about the streaming. I did record everything, and I think the Galactic Council might be very interested in seeing what the Vraxians have been up to, don't you? As the transport accelerated away from the facility, Trevor looked at his mother with new appreciation. Mom, that was. Just wait until I tell them about your C in algebra, Debbie replied, but she was smiling as she said it. Behind them, the Vraxian collection facility grew smaller, and an angry mother's legend grew larger. The personnel carrier wasn't designed for a high-speed getaway. It was designed for the comfortable transportation of bureaucrats, with all the speed and maneuverability of a sedated hippopotamus. This became painfully apparent when the first Vraxian security cruiser appeared on their tail. They're gaining on us, Glorp announced from the pilot's seat, his scales flashing a nervous mauve. This transport has no weapons, minimal shields, and... He pressed a button. Apparently the only defensive measure is a passive-aggressive message that says, "How's my flying? Contact my supervisor." Clicks had gone beyond panic and straight into a bizarre calm. This is fine. Everything is fine. We've merely stolen hundreds of children from a highly secure facility run by one of the founding members of the Galactic Union. I'm sure this won't end with us being atomized or imprisoned for several lifetimes. Debbie, who had been checking on the children in the passenger compartment, returned to the cockpit with a determined expression. We need a plan. And we need somewhere to go where the Vraxians can't follow. We could try the neutrality zone near the Bloxian Nebula, Glorp suggested. No military vessels are allowed there under the Treaty of. No, Debbie said firmly. We need help, not just a temporary hiding place. These kids need to get home. Trevor, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. What about that retired war general you were telling me about, Mum? The one who keeps sending you those weird fruit baskets with the notes about battle strategy. Debbie's eyes lit up. Madame Zorix. Of course. Glorp, can you set a course for the Zorix estate in the Andromeda cluster? Glorp's scales shifted to a confused orange. The Madame Zorix? The legendary commander who won the Battle of 17 Suns? She's been in isolation for decades. No one's even seen her since. Since she started sending me fruit baskets, yes, set the course. As Glorp adjusted their heading, 2 more Vraxian cruisers joined the pursuit. The personnel carrier shuddered as it pushed its engines well beyond their intended capacity. We're not going to outrun them, Clix observed unnecessarily. We don't need to outrun them, Debbie said. We just need to stay ahead until we reach Zorix's territory. She reached into her purse and pulled out what appeared to be a bedazzled phone case. And I have just the thing to slow them down. Before anyone could ask what a rhinestone-covered phone accessory could possibly do to help, Debbie pressed a hidden button, and the case split open to reveal a compact device covered in blinking lights. Is that a quantum disruptor? Clix asked, his voice rising several octaves. Those are illegal in 16 systems. 17. Actually, Debbie corrected. Madame Zorix gave it to me as a welcome to the neighborhood gift. Said I might need it someday. She gestured to the rear view screen showing the pursuing cruisers. I'd say today qualifies. With the press of a button, the device activated. Behind them, space briefly rippled like water, and the pursuing cruisers suddenly found themselves moving at 1/10 their previous speed, as if caught in invisible molasses. That won't hold them long, Debbie said, tucking the now depleted device back into her purse. But it should buy us enough time. 2 hours and 3 more close calls later, they approached the Andromeda cluster. Unlike the sleek, modern architecture of the Galactic Union's core systems, this region was dotted with fortress-like structures, remnants of the old wars that had eventually led to the Union's formation. The Zorix estate was particularly imposing, a massive asteroid that had been hollowed out and converted into a combination of military bunker, luxury residence, and what appeared to be a highly aggressive botanical garden. As they approached, automated defense systems locked onto their ship. Unidentified vessel, you have entered restricted space. Identify yourself or be disintegrated. You have 3 seconds. 2. 1. Madame Zorix, Debbie called out. It's Debbie Rawlins. I'm calling in that favor you mentioned about the potato salad recipe. There was a long pause. The weapons remained locked on their ship. Everyone in the cockpit held their breath. Finally, a gruff voice responded, the ambassador with the excellent potato salad. Why didn't you say so? And what's this about calling in a favor? I don't recall owing you one. You said, and I quote, if you ever need someone disintegrated, just let me know. I brought my own people to disintegrate, if that helps. Another pause, then a bark of laughter. I like your style, Rawlins. Docking Bay 7 is open. Try not to crash, I just had the floors polished. The Zorix estate's interior was a study in contrasts. Military-grade security systems alongside priceless art. Weapon racks next to delicate flower arrangements. And presiding over it all was Madame Zorix herself, a massive, 6-armed being with iridescent scales, wearing what appeared to be a combination of battle armor and a smoking jacket. Ambassador Rawlins Zorix rumbled, I see you've brought guests. Lots of guests. Her multifaceted eyes took in the hundreds of children now milling about her main hall. This is either a very elaborate surprise party, or you're in some serious trouble. Quickly, Debbie explained the situation. As she spoke, Zorix's expression grew darker. The Vraxian collection, she growled. I fought against that abomination centuries ago. Thought we'd shut it down for good. Should have known those scale-faced hoarders would find a loophole. We need your help, Debbie said. These children need to get home, and the Vraxians are in pursuit. Zorix cracked all 6 of her knuckles in sequence, a sound like boulders colliding. Well, I have been feeling rather bored lately. Retirement doesn't suit me, she activated a console on her massive desk. Initiate Defense Protocol Omega-7. And bring me my war boots. As alarms began to sound throughout the estate, Zorix turned to Debbie with what might have been a smile. It was hard to tell with all the teeth. So, Ambassador, you've rescued hundreds of children from one of the most secure facilities in the galaxy, outrun the Vraxian security fleet, and managed to find the one person who both hates the Vraxians and has enough firepower to hold them off. I underestimated you. Most people do, Debbie replied. It's the cardigan. Throws them off. While Zorix's security systems prepared for the inevitable Vraxian assault, Debbie, Clix, Glorp, and Trevor helped organize the rescued children. They converted Zorix's ballroom, yes. The retired war general had a ballroom into a makeshift dormitory, set up a food distribution system in the dining hall, and established a communication center to begin the process of contacting the children's home worlds. It was during this organization that Debbie discovered something important. Many of the children had been in the collection for years, some for decades, given the different aging rates of various species. Some of the younger ones barely remembered their homes. This is worse than I thought, she told Clix as they distributed blankets. Some of these kids have grown up in captivity. They don't know anything else. Clix, who had finally accepted that his career in law enforcement was effectively over, nodded solemnly. The Vraxians will claim they were providing a valuable educational experience. They'll have documentation showing that it was all perfectly legal. Legal doesn't mean right, Debbie said firmly. At that moment, Glorp rushed in, his scales a panicked yellow. They're here. A Vraxian diplomatic cruiser just entered the system. They're demanding that Madame Zorix turn us over immediately. In the command center, Zorix was already on the communication channel, looking thoroughly unimpressed by the Vraxian ambassador's threats. A violation of multiple treaties, the ambassador was saying. The collection is protected under galactic law, and the removal of specimens constitutes theft of cultural artifacts. Interesting argument, Zorix replied, casually sharpening what appeared to be a ceremonial battle axe, particularly coming from someone in range of my main cannons. You wouldn't dare. An attack on a diplomatic vessel would. Would what? Start a war? I'm retired, not dead. I could use the exercise. Debbie stepped into view of the communication screen. Ambassador, let's be clear about what's happening here. You've been kidnapping children and keeping them in cages. That stops now. The Vraxian scales rippled with indignation. These are legal acquisitions, carefully maintained for scientific and cultural purposes. The collection has existed for millennia. So has bad breath. But that doesn't make it right, Debbie retorted. Here's what's going to happen. These children are going home. All of them. And the collection is going to be shut down. You have no authority to. Actually, Clix interjected, stepping into frame. According to the Sentient Rights Accord, Section 129, juvenile specimens of any species are entitled to protection from exploitation. There's also the matter of the cultural exemption clause being misapplied in this case, as cultural preservation does not extend to the containment of sentient beings against their will or the will of their legal guardians. The Vraxian ambassador blinked in surprise. And who are you? Officer Clix, Interspecies Relations and Compliance Division. Currently I am. He paused, then straightened his shoulders. I am acting in accordance with the spirit of the law rather than the letter. Madame Zorix chuckled. A sound like rocks in a tumbler. Well said, little blue man. Now, Ambassador, here's the situation. I have enough firepower to turn your ship into an artistic light display. Ambassador Rawlins has enough evidence to create the biggest diplomatic scandal since the Regellian pudding incident. And these children have enough sad stories to turn public opinion against the Vraxian Empire for generations. Your move. There was a long pause as the Vraxian ambassador considered his options. Finally, his scales settled into a pattern of resignation. Perhaps there is room for negotiation. What followed was a masterclass in diplomacy, with Debbie Rawlins, suburban mom turned interstellar negotiator, leading the charge. By the time they were finished, they had secured safe passage for all the children back to their home worlds. A commitment to reform the collection, transitioning it to a voluntary cultural exchange program. Amnesty for everyone involved in the Great Rescue, as it was already being called on the Galactic Infonet. a formal apology from the Vraxian government. As the negotiation concluded, Madame Zorix looked at Debbie with newfound respect. "You know, Rawlins, you missed your calling. With skills like that, you could have been a legendary war general." Debbie smiled. "I am a legendary war general. It's called being a mom." With the immediate crisis averted, they turned their attention to the logistics of returning hundreds of children to dozens of worlds. Glorp, who had discovered a talent for organization, created a database of all the children, their species, and their home worlds. Clix, freed from the constraints of following rules blindly, found creative solutions to the complex legal issues involved in repatriating the children. And at the center of it all was Debbie Rawlins, who approached the monumental task with the same energy she brought to organizing school fundraisers. "We'll need transport ships, medical support for any children who need it, diplomatic clearances for crossing borders," she was saying as she paced Zorix's war room, now converted into a planning center. Mom, Trevor interrupted. "You're doing that thing again." "What thing?" "That thing where you turn into a one-woman army. You know you don't have to do this all yourself, right? There are literally hundreds of people here who can help." Debbie paused, then smiled at her son. "When did you get so smart?" "Probably around the time I watched my mum break into an alien facility and rescue a bunch of kids using nothing but a smartphone and a can of hairspray." As they worked, word of the rescue spread throughout the Galactic Union. Offers of help poured in from dozens of species, many of whom had lost children to the collection over the centuries. Transport ships arrived, volunteered by various governments and private citizens. Medical teams came to check on the children's health. Diplomats arrived to smooth the way for repatriation. What had started as one mother's mission to save her son had blossomed into a galactic movement. In a quiet moment, as they watched ships begin to depart with their precious cargo of returning children, Clix approached Debbie. "Ambassador Rawlins, I owe you an apology. I was so focused on rules and procedures that I couldn't see the bigger picture." He shuffled his feet. "I've spent my career believing that the system worked, that if we just followed the proper channels, justice would prevail. You showed me that sometimes you have to make your own justice." Debbie put a hand on his shoulder. "The system does work, Clix. Sometimes it just needs a good kick to get it started." As the last transport prepared to depart, carrying Trevor and the remaining human children back to Earth, Madame Zorix presented Debbie with a small, ornate box. "A token of my esteem," the war general rumbled. "It's a quantum disruptor. The new model." "I thought those were illegal in 17 systems," Debbie said with a smile. 18 now, actually. They added Betelgeuse V to the list after what you did." Zorix's many eyes twinkled. "Consider it a maternal emergency tool." As their transport lifted off, Trevor looked at his mother with a mixture of awe and embarrassment, the latter being the default state of any teenager regarding their parent. "So, are you going to tell Dad about any of this?" Debbie tucked the quantum disruptor into her purse, right next to her lip balm and emergency snacks. "I think I'll just tell him we had an educational experience about interstellar relations, which is true." She glanced at her watch. "Though we should probably come up with a good explanation for why we're 3 days late for dinner." As the ship accelerated toward Earth, carrying a group of teenagers with the most unbelievable "what I did on my field trip" stories in history, Debbie Rawlins' ordinary mom, extraordinary ambassador, and now reluctant galactic hero, made a mental note to add one more item to her ever-growing to-do list. Update PTA on new field trip safety protocols for interstellar excursions. Some things never change, even when everything else does. The journey back to Galactic Union headquarters should have been uneventful. The negotiations had been successful, the children were being returned home, and even the Vraxians had grudgingly admitted that perhaps keeping sentient children in display cases wasn't the best look for an advanced civilization. But of course, nothing involving Debbie Rawlins ever stayed simple for long. Halfway to Earth, their transport received an urgent message. The Vraxian High Curator, Zex Talik, had declared the negotiated agreement null and void, claiming it was made under duress. The Vraxian fleet had been mobilized to recapture the stolen specimens, and the Galactic Council had called an emergency session to address the crisis. "Are you kidding me?" Debbie exploded when the message came through. "We had a deal. Madame Zorix, who had decided to accompany them back to see the fireworks, her words, merely chuckled. Vraxians. Always looking for the loophole. This is why I kept all my war cannons operational. Clix, who had been in the middle of explaining galactic citizenship procedures to a group of formerly captive children, hurried over. This is bad. If the Council rules in favor of the Vraxians, they could legally repossess retake all the children. Over my dead body, Debbie said, her voice dangerously calm. Trevor, who had been uncharacteristically helpful during the journey, looked up from where he was teaching alien kids to play cards. Mom's got her someone's about to be very sorry voice. Last time I heard that, our neighbor's prize-winning Roses mysteriously died after he complained about our charity car wash. I had nothing to do with that, Debbie said automatically. But we need a plan. The council session is in 6 hours, and we're still 4 hours out. Glorp, who had become something of Debbie's unofficial aide, raised a tentative hand. I might have an idea. It's a bit unconventional. At this point, unconventional is my middle name, Debbie replied. What have you got? What followed was perhaps the most bizarre preparation for a Galactic Council hearing in the history of the Union. Using the transport's communication system, they reached out to every species whose children had been in the collection. They gathered testimonies, compiled evidence, and prepared a case that would be impossible to ignore. But Glorp's real stroke of genius was setting up a live feed to broadcast the council session to every world in the Union. Transparency, he explained, his scales a confident blue. The Vraxians are counting on bureaucracy and closed-door politics. Let's give them the opposite. By the time they arrived at headquarters, the council chamber was packed. Representatives from hundreds of worlds had arrived to witness the proceedings, and outside, massive screens had been set up where crowds gathered to watch. The Vraxian delegation looked distinctly uncomfortable with the unexpected publicity. As Debbie strode into the chamber, accompanied by Trevor, Clix, Glorp, and Madame Zorix, who was drawing quite a lot of attention in her ceremonial battle armor, a hush fell over the crowd. The council chairperson, a wizened being of indeterminate species, called the session to order. We are here to address the complaint filed by the Vraxian Empire regarding the incident at their cultural collection facility. Zex Talik, the High Curator, rose to speak first. Gone was the smooth confidence he had displayed in his facility. Now he seemed anxious, his scales shifting between patterns so quickly it was almost dizzying. Esteemed council members. He began. What occurred was nothing less than an act of terrorism. Ambassador Rawlins illegally infiltrated our facility, damaged valuable property, and stole priceless cultural specimens that have been legally acquired and maintained for centuries under the Cultural Heritage Preservation Act. Murmurs ran through the chamber. Debbie could see some council members nodding thoughtfully, and her heart sank. Then she felt a tug on her sleeve. Mom, Trevor whispered, "Remember what you always tell me about school presentations. Show, don't just tell." Debbie smiled at her son, then stood. If the council permits, I would like to show exactly what the Vraxian collection really is. Before the chairperson could respond, Debbie activated her smartphone and connected it to the chamber's holographic display system. The footage she had recorded in the collection facility began to play, showing habitat after habitat filled with confused and frightened children. These aren't specimens, Debbie said firmly. They're children. Children who were taken from their families, their homes, their worlds. Children who have been kept in cages, no matter how luxurious those cages might be for the amusement and curiosity of others. The chamber erupted in shocked exclamations as the footage continued. Zex Talik tried to interrupt, but the chairperson silenced him with a raised hand. Is this accurate? Curator, the chairperson asked, their voice heavy with concern. It is. A matter of perspective, Zex Talik hedged. These habitats are designed to mimic their natural environments. They are educational exhibits, carefully maintained for the preservation of cultural diversity. Then you won't mind if we hear from the exhibits themselves, Debbie countered. She gestured, and a group of the rescued children entered the chamber, representatives from a dozen different species, with Trevor among them. One by one they spoke. They talked about being taken from school trips, about losing years of their lives in captivity, about watching their friends grow old in artificial environments while they were studied like insects under glass. By the time they finished, There wasn't a dry eye or equivalent sensory organ in the chamber. Even some of the Vraxian delegation looked uncomfortable. But Zex Talik wasn't finished. Emotional appeals aside, the law is clear. The collection is protected under Section 7 of the Cultural Heritage Act, which allows for the preservation of representative specimens. Objection. The voice came not from Debbie, but from Clicks, who stepped forward with a stack of datapads. I have reviewed the entire legal history of the Cultural Heritage Act, and nowhere does it state that sentient beings, particularly minors, can be held against their will or the will of their guardians. The chairperson blinked in surprise. Officer Clicks, you are not a legal representative. No, I'm not, Clicks agreed. I'm a law enforcement officer who has spent his career blindly following rules without questioning whether they were just. I'm here to correct that mistake. He activated the datapads, projecting a complex legal analysis onto the chamber's screens. The Vraxians have been exploiting a deliberate misinterpretation of the law for centuries. The original act was meant to preserve artifacts and cultural practices, not to imprison children. The council members leaned forward, examining the evidence with growing concern. Zex Talik's scales had turned a sickly yellow. Furthermore, Clicks continued, I've taken the liberty of cross-referencing the collection's acquisition records with reports of missing children across the Union. The pattern is disturbing. New data appeared on the screens, showing hundreds of matches children reported missing who had later appeared in the Vraxian collection. The chairperson turned to the Vraxian delegation, their expression grave. Curator Zex Talik, how do you explain this? Before the curator could respond, the chamber doors burst open, and a squad of Vraxian security officers stormed in, weapons drawn. This session is over, announced a Vraxian commander. By authority of the Imperial Decree of Cultural Preservation, we are reclaiming our property and detaining those responsible for its theft. The chamber erupted in chaos. Council members dove for cover, aides scattered, and the children huddled together in fear. The Vraxian officers advanced, weapons trained on Debbie and her companions. And then, Madame Zorix laughed. It wasn't a chuckle or a giggle. It was a full-bodied, six-armed, battle-hardened laugh that echoed through the chamber like thunder. The Vraxian officers hesitated, suddenly uncertain. I was hoping for this, Zorix rumbled, cracking all 6 sets of knuckles in sequence. Diplomatic solutions are so boring. What happened next would later be described in the official report as a regrettable breakdown in chamber security protocols. What actually happened was that a retired war general who had been itching for some action for decades finally got her wish. Zorix moved with shocking speed for someone her size, disarming 2 officers before they could blink. Glorp, his scales flashing battle patterns that hadn't been seen in generations, demonstrated that Vraxian diplomatic interns apparently received combat training. And Clicks, to everyone's surprise including his own, turned out to be remarkably effective with an improvised weapon fashioned from a ceremonial council staff. But it was Debbie who truly shocked the chamber. Armed with nothing but her purse and maternal determination, she cut through the Vraxian security like a hot knife through butter. Years of breaking up playground fights, navigating Black Friday sales, and managing school fundraisers had apparently translated into a unique combat style that the Vraxians were completely unprepared for. My garden club meets in 20 minutes, Debbie yelled as she took down a Vraxian officer with what appeared to be a travel-sized bottle of hairspray and a very aggressive mom voice. I don't have time for this nonsense. The fight was brief but spectacular. When it was over, the Vraxian security forces were incapacitated. Zex Talik was trying to hide behind the council chairperson's podium, and the entire chamber was staring at Debbie Rawlins with newfound respect and more than a little fear. Now then, Debbie said, calmly putting her hairspray back in her purse as if nothing unusual had happened, shall we continue the discussion in a civilized manner? The chairperson, who had taken refuge behind a potted plant during the commotion, cautiously emerged. I think we've seen enough to make a determination. The council finds the Vraxian collection to be in violation of multiple sentient rights accords. All former exhibits are to be returned to their homes immediately, and the collection is hereby ordered to cease operations pending a full investigation. Zex Talik's scales had gone completely pale. This is unprecedented. The collection has existed for millennia. You can't just. We can, and we have, the chairperson said firmly. Additionally, in light of the attempted armed takeover of a council session, all Vraxian representatives are suspended from the council pending review. As security forces, non-Vraxian ones this time, led the Vraxian delegation away, Debbie turned to the children who had bravely testified. You did it, she told them. You stood up for yourselves and for all the others who couldn't be here. I'm proud of all of you. Trevor, who had spent the entire confrontation filming everything on his phone for my YouTube channel, Mom, gave his mother a one-armed hug. That was sick. Wait until Dad sees this. He always says you're scary at the PTA meetings, but this was next level. As the council chamber gradually returned to some semblance of order, Debbie found herself surrounded by representatives from dozens of worlds, all wanting to thank her for her actions. Proposals were already being made for new laws to protect children across the galaxy, with many suggesting they be called the Rawlins Protocols. Amid the chaos, Glorp approached Debbie, his scales a contemplative purple. You know, when I helped you break into the Vraxian embassy, I never imagined it would end like this. I just thought it would be more interesting than filing reports. Life has a way of surprising you, Debbie agreed. What will you do now? Going back to your internship seems a bit anticlimactic. Glorp's scales rippled with amusement. Actually, I've been offered a position with the Council's new Sentient Rights Enforcement Division. Apparently, my unique perspective on institutional power structures is valuable. He paused. That's a direct quote from the job offer, which I'm pretty sure Clicks wrote. Speaking of Clicks, the formerly by the book officer was deep in conversation with a group of legal experts, animatedly discussing reforms to the Cultural Heritage Act. He caught Debbie's eye and gave her a small salute, which she returned with a smile. As the impromptu celebration continued, a council aide approached Debbie with an urgent message. Her minivan had been impounded for 17 different violations of the station's parking regulations. Some things, it seemed, were universal. What followed was perhaps the most unusual high-speed chase in galactic history, not because it was particularly fast. Debbie's minivan had been modified for space travel but was still, fundamentally, a minivan, but because of who was involved. The Council had arranged for Debbie and the Earth children to be escorted back to their planet with full diplomatic honors. What they hadn't anticipated was Debbie insisting on driving her own vehicle, or the convoy of well-wishers who decided to join the procession. Mon, is that the Andromeda Defense Fleet behind us? Trevor asked, peering out the rear window of the minivan. Madame Zorix called in some favors, Debbie replied, carefully navigating through an asteroid field while simultaneously trying to find her favorite radio station. She thought we might need an honor guard. An honor guard of battleships. She's a bit extra. In the back seats, several of Trevor's classmates were teaching alien children how to play I Spy in 20 questions with predictably chaotic results, given the different sensory organs involved. As they approached the jump point that would take them back to Earth, galactic traffic control suddenly came over the comm system. Ambassador Rawlins, please be advised that there is a no-fly zone ahead due to... Wait, are those your ships? We're reading 17 different fleets in formation around your vehicle. Please confirm. Debbie picked up the con. Just some friends making sure we get home safely. We'll be out of your space in a jiffy. A jiffy? Our translators don't have that unit of time. It means don't worry about it, Debbie explained. And maybe don't tell the Vraxians which way we went. As the motley convoy prepared to jump, Debbie glanced in her rearview mirror at the children safely secured in her minivan, at the massive fleet escorting them home, and at the Galactic Union headquarters growing smaller in the distance. Next time, she murmured to herself, I'm just going to send Trevor to summer camp on Earth. But even as she said it, she knew there was no going back to the way things were before. Something had changed in the galaxy, something important. And somehow a suburban mom from Minnesota had been at the center of it all. As they made the jump, Trevor leaned over and whispered, You know you're going to get asked to give a speech at the next UNE meeting, right? Debbie groaned. I hope they don't schedule it on the same night as the PTA meeting. I promised to bring my potato salad. Behind them, 17 fleets representing dozens of grateful species formed an honor guard as the most terrifying force in the galaxy. An angry human mother headed home, already planning how to explain all this to her husband. The return to Earth was more eventful than Debbie had anticipated. News of the Minnesota mom who saved the galaxy had somehow reached Earth before they did, courtesy of Trevor's viral videos. When they finally touched down in their suburban neighborhood, they were greeted by a crowd of neighbors, news vans, and several government officials looking both confused and concerned. "Well, this is awkward," Debbie muttered as she parked the minivan in her driveway, 17 different alien fleets visible in the night sky above them. Her husband Dave stood on their front lawn, mouth agape, garden hose still running in his hand. "Honey," he managed weakly, "when you said you were taking the kids on a field trip, I thought you meant the science museum." It was educational, Debbie offered as she stepped out of the van. "Ask Trevor about his project on interspecies diplomacy." The UN meetings were, indeed, scheduled on the same night as the PTA meeting. Debbie sent her potato salad with Dave to the PTA and addressed the United Nations in her good pantsuit, with a small army of formerly captive alien children sitting proudly in the gallery. The Rawlins protocols were ratified in record time, establishing Earth as an unexpected leader in galactic child welfare policy. Life gradually settled into a new normal. Trevor's YouTube channel hit 10 million subscribers, most of them not human. The school district had to create a new exchange program to accommodate all the alien families wanting to send their children to Mrs. Rawlins' planet. And Debbie found herself serving as Earth's unofficial ambassador to the galaxy, a role she approached with the same practical efficiency she brought to managing the PTA and her garden club. 6 months after their return, as Debbie was pruning her rosebushes now supplemented with some interesting Centaurian specimens that changed color based on the gardener's mood, a familiar figure appeared at her garden gate. "Glorp. What a lovely surprise," Debbie said, setting down her shears. "How's the new job?" Glorp's scales shimmered a contented blue. "Excellent. Though not nearly as exciting as my time with you. The Sentient Rights Enforcement Division is actually making real progress. The Vraxians have been completely restructured, and Zextalik is performing community service by teaching art to underprivileged children on 17 different planets." Poetic justice, Debbie nodded approvingly. Tea. As they sat on the patio, Glorp shared news of the galaxy. Clix had been promoted to head a new division focusing on updating antiquated laws. The children they'd rescued had formed an advocacy group called Debbie's Kids that was making waves across 3 sectors. And the Council had formally recognized Earth as a protected planet with special diplomatic status. "They're terrified of you," Glorp admitted with an amused ripple of scales. Debbie laughed as she poured more tea. "Wait until they meet our PTA treasurer, Sharon. Now she's scary." That evening, as the family sat down to dinner with Glorp as their guest, Dave looked around the table and shook his head in wonder. "If someone had told me a year ago that we'd be having dinner with an alien diplomat while discussing galactic politics, I'd have thought they were crazy," he said. "But here we are." "Here we are," Debbie agreed, passing the salad to Glorp, who had developed a surprising fondness for ranch dressing. Later, as they stood in the backyard looking up at the stars, now knowing what and who was out there, Trevor asked the question that had been on everyone's mind. "So, Mom, where are we going for next year's field trip?" Debbie smiled mysteriously. "I hear the Andromeda Galaxy has some lovely educational opportunities. But first," she added, checking her watch, "I have to finish preparing for tomorrow's garden club. We're discussing interplanetary horticulture, and I promised to bring muffins." Some things, even in a post-first contact world, never changed, and Debbie wouldn't have it any other way.